There is nothing more tantalising to the human species than a good mystery. Thrillers in the forms of novels, movies, and even campfire tales are often consumed by the thousands who love the adrenaline rush of solving a mystery. However, some of the most pervasive mysteries are those that occur in real life, and these are the ones that are often most difficult to solve. So today, here at Unexplained Mysteries, we'll be taking a look at mysterious discoveries. Yang Liwei. The first strange story is of Yang Liwei. Yang Liwei was the first man sent into space by China. As a result of this mission, known as Shenzhou 5, China became the third independent country to send humans into space. It was on this mission that Yang Liwei heard some unsettling sounds. He recalled that the noises sounded as if they were caused by someone knocking the body of the spaceship, which neither came from outside nor inside the spacecraft. Understandably, this caused Yang some concern. He went to look out of the spacecraft's portal, seeking a reasonable explanation for the troubling knocking sounds. However, nothing could explain the strange sounds. After safely returning to Earth, Yang set about trying to find an explanation for the sounds with the help of top scientists and space experts. Professor Goh Che-hyang, an expert in space engineering at the University of Singapore, has speculated that the knocking may have been caused by something hitting the spacecraft, such as space debris. However, no one has been able to verify this. One of his colleagues, Wei Seng So, presented a different explanation, suggesting that the strange sounds could have been a result of expansion or contraction of the spaceship, especially since the temperature of the spaceship's exterior could change considerably within orbit. Interestingly, similar knocking sounds have been heard on other Chinese space expeditions, including ones taking place in 2005 and 2008. The fact that similar sounds have been heard on other Chinese space expeditions suggests that perhaps there is an issue, common to many Chinese spacecrafts, which is responsible for the sounds. Fortunately, there have been no major incidents that posed any danger on these voyages, meaning that the strange sounds were possibly nothing for the astronauts to worry about. Many people believe that space must be totally silent due to the lack of air or water particles for sound waves to travel through. However, if accounts by other astronauts are anything to go by, hearing sounds in space is certainly not uncommon. Other examples of sounds heard in space include a strange noise heard during a test flight for the moon landing mission in 1969, after the spacecraft had been cut off from radio contact with Earth. The unearthly sounds were described as space music, and only recently has a recording of the sounds been released to the public. Theories abound as to what could have caused the strange noises heard by Yang Liwei. From logical explanations to the more left-field possibility of alien forces trying to enter Yang's spacecraft. Yang is now a major general in China's Air Force and says he has never again heard sounds similar to those which he heard in space. Ultimately, we may never know what caused these mysterious sounds. Dr. Story Musgrave. Our second bizarre story is that of the strange objects captured by Dr. Story Musgrave in space. Franklin Story Musgrave, known as Story Musgrave, was born in 1935 in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. One of 7 children, Musgrave grew up to become a physician and a NASA astronaut, despite having come from an extraordinarily dysfunctional family full of abuse and alcoholism. In 1996, he became only the second astronaut to fly on 6 spaceflights. A highly intelligent individual, he holds 6 academic degrees, making him the world's most formally educated astronaut. In 1998, Musgrave held the record for the oldest person in orbit at age 61. With a huge variety of interests and a highly diverse range of career experiences, Musgrave has obviously had a very interesting life. One of the most curious tales of his space career was one involving a strange sighting from his spacecraft. Musgrave has said to have seen on at least 2 of his missions something he can only describe as a snake-looking being at least 6 to 8 feet long. Looking rubbery due to internal waves, and Musgrave believes this snake follows you for long periods of time throughout space. Musgrave believes that the snake must have been white in colour in order to reflect sunlight and appeared to swim due to the velocity of the nearby spacecraft. Due to the lack of gravity in space, items like the snake are able to glide freely, in what Musgrave calls an extraordinary ballet. The only theory that Musgrave has to explain the strange object is that it may have been an uncritical rubber seal from the main engines. Interestingly, Musgrave has a strong belief in the existence of other life forms, a belief that was crystallized on his many space voyages. He says, "The more you fly in space, the more you see an incredible amount of things out there. And that sort of thing brings to you, really, a certainty that other living creatures are out there." In other interviews, he has said, "I feel that they're everywhere out there, and they're doing interstellar travel. We'll think differently about ourselves once we accept that." Now 84, it is unlikely that Musgrave will ever get a concrete explanation for his bizarre sightings while in space. However, the fact that such an intelligent and accomplished individual believes with such conviction that we are not alone in the universe is a comfort to those who adamantly believe that humans are not the only species inhabiting the universe. The 13-year-old's car discovery. Griffin Lake in British Columbia, Canada, is a deep blue expanse sitting below stunning mountains amid beautiful Canadian countryside. Snowy peaks stand majestically at the end of the lake, with the scenic retreat making a perfect countryside getaway location. But in 2019, Griffin Lake became the subject of a mysterious discovery, one that had evaded Canadian police for nearly 30 years. Max Warenka was a normal 13-year-old boy from Alberta, Canada. He enjoyed the outdoors and had spent time in the past filming his adventures with his GoPro camera. In August 2019, Warenka had been out paddleboarding on Griffin Lake when he spotted something strange lurking below the surface. A group of people who had been staying in cabins on the lake shore also came to have a look, and they deduced that they were seeing the shiny underside of a car. Bemused as to what a car could be doing at the bottom of the lake, Warenka and his family reported the discovery to the police. After doing some Googling, the group realized that a group of 4 people had been rescued from a sunken vehicle in Griffin Lake in 2007, assuming that the car was simply left over from that. A pretty cool discovery nonetheless, but the Royal Canadian Mounted Police came to the lake to check it out anyway. When the police arrived, the presumed car did not appear so clearly, so the police asked Max to dive into the lake with his GoPro to see what he could find. Lo and behold, the car was still there, in full, and there was a human body in the driver's seat. It quickly became apparent that the car wasn't the one in the 2007 rescue, but one that had been at the bottom of the lake for potentially some time. The police divers team arrived a few days later and confirmed the body in the car. Analysis revealed that the body was that of Janet Farris, who had disappeared on her way to a wedding in the Griffin Lake area. Police were quick to rule out foul play and rather concluded that it was likely Janet swerved, trying to avoid an animal or something else, and lost control, spinning into the lake. Though the truth will never be fully known, for Janet's family, however, a welcome comfort to finally knowing where their relative was all this time. Egyptian mummy's unusual mud shell. Mummies wrapped in strips of linen are a well-known phenomenon of ancient Egypt. However, these burial methods were usually reserved for the very wealthy, and less is known about how the working class buried their loved ones. That is, until CT scans of a mummy dating back to around 1200 BC gave a few hints. The mummy is encased in a dried mud shell in between the standard layers of linen wrapping. This caked mud method is incredibly interesting, as archaeologists have never encountered a preservation technique using mud before. They plan to study this mummy carefully to determine what the mud could have accomplished, but their first guess is that it was used as a way to preserve and prepare the body for burial in a way that was both affordable for the common man and resembled the methods used by royalty and the very wealthy. The body is also damaged, and archaeologists theorize that the mud could have been used to repair damage to the mummy after grave robbers fractured the legs. As ancient Egyptians believed that the state of the entombed body directly reflected the state of the body in the afterlife, it would have been imperative for the family members of the deceased to repair the damage caused by grave robbers so that their loved one could continue to live on in the afterlife with a whole body. The mud appears to have been spread intentionally and with great precision and care. While it is a couple of centimeters thick over the damaged legs, it spreads to cover the entire body in thinner layers. Over the face, for example, it is a mere 1.5 millimeters thick. Additionally, it seems that the mud over the face was painted with white and red limestone and mineral pigments. Although further analysis of the coloured flakes is required to determine the exact pattern and painting style of this face paint, some believe that it might have been an attempt to imitate the painting of elaborate masks that were placed over mummies' faces before enclosing them in sarcophagi for burial. Some archaeologists speculate that this potential imitation of the burial of higher individuals in society was also why the mud layer was applied in the first place, as it seems to resemble the resin layer placed on the mummies of pharaohs and members of the royal retinue. Imitation of the monarchs was very important to ancient Egyptians, as social status was largely determined by how closely you could come to the expensive metals, jewels, and materials that the pharaoh wore. Resin layers, preservation, rituals, and even mummification in general were incredibly expensive, and the mud layer might have been a way to emulate a much more lavish burial. However, at this point, all of these theories are merely speculation, as it is not even clear where the mud-caked individual ranked in society. They could have been very rich or incredibly poor, and whichever side of this spectrum that they end up being on could make one of the theories incredibly more probable than the others. For now, the reasoning of the lone mummy covered in mud remains just one more enduring mystery to be solved. Studies in ice cores found in Mount Kilimanjaro have revealed that a drought did take place 3,600 years ago. Although the biblical story of Joseph is one that is well documented, not only in the Christian Bible but also in the Torah and the Quran, it has generally been treated as a highly dramatized story, very loosely based on possible historical events that are intended to teach a lesson rather than act as a definitive record of what occurred. However, some compelling evidence has emerged in Egypt that seems to indicate that there might be more truth to the story than first believed. The story begins with Joseph, the 11th of 12 sons, who was highly favoured by his father Jacob, much to the irritation of the 11 other brothers. He was gifted a token of this favouritism in the form of a lavishly coloured coat that sparked the jealousy of his other brothers. The Bible says that the coat was coloured with red and purple dyes, which were the most prestigious and valuable colours in the ancient world due to their extreme cost and difficulty in procurement. Faced with such a blatant display of partiality and frightened of the meaning behind strange dreams that he kept having, Joseph's brothers sold him to an Egyptian slave merchant and returned the coat to Jacob, smeared with goat's blood and claiming that Joseph had been killed. Once in Egypt, Joseph was imprisoned, but his continuing prophetic dreams and skills in interpretation allowed him to gain the attention of the pharaoh, who was troubled with disturbing dreams. Joseph said that the pharaoh's dreams indicated that there were to be 7 years of plenty in Egypt, followed by 7 years of famine, and he was given the task of advising the pharaoh in preparations for the years of famine. During this time, Joseph rose through the ranks of the Egyptian court and quickly became one of the most prominent members of the government, as he oversaw grain storage and preparations to see Egypt through the impending 7 years of famine. There has never been a record of any high-ranking Egyptian during this period who was called Joseph, and because it was highly unlikely that a foreign servant-turned-prisoner could reach the ranks of top advisor to the pharaoh, it was always thought that this story was more of a richly embellished parable than a factual tale recounting actual events. However, a recent discovery in Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania has lent some credence to Joseph's story. Mount Kilimanjaro is the source of the Nile River's water, and the Nile River was, and still is, the lifeblood of Egypt. Without it full and flowing, crops and livestock would weaken and die, and famine would spread across the land, just as Joseph predicted in his interpretations of the Pharaoh's dreams. Also, studies of Kilimanjaro ice cores have found that there was a massive drought that took place about 3,600 years ago, around the same time that Joseph would have been advising the king. Additionally, a canal that was built to keep the Nile River branches open and flowing, and that allowed the tributaries around it to remain fertile, did such an excellent job that it is still in use today and functions successfully. Nobody knows who built the canal, but its Arabic name has been passed down from ancient times by the people who live nearby and translates to the waterway of Joseph, leading many to believe that it was built by Joseph in an effort to reduce the impact of the famine. While we may never know which parts of the story are true and which are myth, it certainly seems that these historical discoveries lend credence to the biblical events. Hidden Pyramid suggests the Mayans had direct contact with another civilization more than 800 miles away. Tikal is an ancient Mayan citadel tucked away in the dense rainforests of Guatemala. It was the ceremonial center of an ancient city that once flourished between 200 and 850 AD. Archaeologists have often speculated that the early civilization was influenced by the culture of Teotihuacan, a Mesoamerican civilization and the region's most powerful kingdom at the time. Located over 800 miles away, the civilization was thought to have a presence in the Mayan city based on artifacts and inscriptions found in the area. With the use of new technologies, a recent high-tech discovery indicates that they were more deeply connected than archaeologists had originally thought. Thanks to a 3D image of the area created using LiDAR technology, a hidden pyramid has been found beneath an unassuming hill in the Tikal landscape. Buried beneath the earth for thousands of years, the lost structure does not resemble any of the city's surviving buildings. Instead, it has all the traditional elements of a Teotihuacan structure and resembles a miniature version of their classic citadels. Multiple excavations of the area reveal that the burial practices, construction, and the types of weaponry and ceramics found inside are all of Teotihuacan design. They found darts made of green obsidian, which is a naturally occurring volcanic glass formed when lava extruded from a volcano cools, was commonly used by the Mesoamerican civilization due to their monopoly on the obsidian trade and the major deposit located just outside their main city. Another discovery in the pyramid was an artifact that was decorated with symbols of the Teotihuacan rain god. This finding is significant because it completely rewrites the theories archaeologists had about the relationship between the two civilizations. It suggests that Tikal could have been an outpost of the Teotihuacan Empire. The research team determined the temple's construction began before the year 278. This would have been 100 years before the Teotihuacan people conquered Tikal, a significant event recounted in ancient Mayan inscriptions. Around the same time, a neighborhood in Teotihuacan decorated in elaborate Mayan murals and style was utterly destroyed and left in ruin. Archaeologists speculate that there was a breakdown in their once strong alliance and hope that further excavations will provide a better understanding of their shared history. Our Lady of the Pillar. Our Lady of the Pillar is a title given to the Virgin Mary with the ancestral belief that whilst she lived in Jerusalem, Mary bilocated and appeared to the Apostle James the Greater in 40 AD while he was preaching in the Roman Hispania, now known as modern Spain. The title also refers to the image celebrating the Marian apparition which lies enshrined in Zaragoza, Aragon, Spain, at the Cathedral Basilica. Pope Pius X granted her image an official canonical coronation in 1905. Bilocation is a supernatural spiritual ability where a person manages to be in two places at once using meditation and astral projection. Catholic legend states that in the antiquity of Christianity, the apostles of Jesus travelled through the known world to spread their gospel to the masses. James the Greater experienced immense obstacles in his missionary quest and was deeply discouraged, questioning whether he should go on. It is said that one evening, as he prayed on the banks of the river Ebro at modern Zaragoza, Mary spiritually travelled to speak with him, despite her physical body being in Jerusalem. With her came thousands of angels, all of whom were sent to encourage him to continue his missionary duty. Ancient Roman tombs of early Christians show some of the earliest Marian devotion to Zaragoza, which have images of the Virgin Mary inside. Though the tradition of worshipping the Marian apparition begun in the 15th century, thought to be either in 1434 or 1435, when an inferno destroyed the altarpiece of the church, which was then replaced with a representation of the Marian apparition visiting John the Greater. In 1456, Pope Calixtus III issued a papal bull which declared a 7-year indulgence for those who visited Our Lady of the Pillar. In another account, this time by Maria de Agreda, Mary, Mother of God, was transported from Jerusalem to Hispania on a mystical cloud of angels during the night. It was during this same night that the angels built a grand pillar of marble and created the image of Mary with the baby Messiah. Mungo Man and Woman. Ancient skeletons help us to piece together the long history of our ancestors and allow us to plot out the evolutionary timeline of our species. But no skeletons have garnered quite the attention from the scientific community like the Mungo Man and Mungo Woman. Found in the dry, deserted bed of the evaporated Lake Mungo, the discoveries were kick-started by Jim Bowler with the University of Melbourne in 1969. Lake Mungo is located in southeastern Australia and is around 760 kilometres or 470 miles due west of Sydney. The lake is also one of 17 included in the World Heritage Willandra Lakes region. The lake dried up around 14,000 years ago, but it was in 1968 that the significance of the lake became clear, when Jim Bowler managed to uncover the skeleton of an Aboriginal Australian woman. Carbon dating showed that the skeleton was 40,000 years old, making them the oldest remains to have ever been found in Australia, and demonstrating that humans had been on the continent for longer than we had originally believed. The bones of the Mungo woman were also burnt, which also makes the discovery the earliest known example of cremation and ceremonial burial anywhere in the world. Amazingly, in 1974, Bowler found another skeleton, this time belonging to a male. The Mungo Man was similarly found to have come from the same period as the previous skeleton. Since the massive discovery, even more human bones and cultural objects have been discovered in the crescent-shaped sand dunes of Lake Mungo. The reason why this area is so significant to archaeologists is because it offers a detailed fossil record of Aboriginal life in the region. Scientists are able to observe how people adapted to the changing climate of the day, as well as the drying of Lake Mungo. Some of the other archaeological finds include stone tools, food waste, and fireplaces. Amazingly, in 2003, a series of footprints left by the Willandra people were discovered and were dated to being 20,000 years old. Today, the Mungo discoveries are an invaluable archaeological resource, as well as a significant cultural and spiritual reference point for Aboriginal Australians. In a modern context, we can see that descendants from the country's original inhabitants, such as the Pakanji, Nyampa, and Muti Muti people, have an intrinsic right and claim to the Australian continent. NASA finds ancient organic material, mysterious methane on Mars. NASA's own Curiosity rover has stumbled across organic material preserved within sedimentary rocks on Mars, up to 3 billion years old. Whilst many people hear organic molecules and assume this equates to life and biological sustainability, NASA has been quick to disclaim that whilst this is exciting, this is not the only possible explanation. The molecules found on Mars certainly contain carbon and hydrogen, with the likely possibility of accompanying elements such as oxygen and nitrogen yet to be found. Associate Administrator for the Science Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters, Thomas Zabukan stated, "With these new findings, Mars is telling us to stay the course and keep searching for evidence of life. Whilst we may not have concrete evidence that Mars has hosted life, we have enough material to speculate and not entirely dismiss the idea that there may once have been life on Mars, supported by the now ancient organic material." Another NASA researcher, Jen Eganbrode, explains that this organic material could simply record and document ancient life, may have even been a food source for life or even existed entirely independently of life. Most importantly, however, she stresses that this is an insightful and promising discovery regardless as to which category this finding does fall into, as it tells us new information regarding the planetary conditions and processes, all informed by the chemical compositions found. Today we can determine that Mars can no longer support life, though this discovery of organic material reminds us that in the past, Mars once had environmental conditions and a climate that could facilitate liquid water, meaning life could theoretically survive. However, this discovery does not end here. Scientists have also discovered a fluctuation in methane levels in the atmosphere of Mars, dependent upon each season. The study observed these changes to be consistent within each Mars year, over a 3-year period on Mars, equating to a 6-year-long study for the scientists here on Earth. This observation was completed by the sample analysis at Mars Suite of the Curiosity. There are multiple explanations, again with varying degrees of excitement attached, as to why the methane levels fluctuate like this. Some suggest that the chemical interaction between water and rock may have generated methane, while others retain a firm belief that we should still consider that this methane has a biological origin, suggesting Mars once hosted some kind of life. Do these new influences and factors suggest that life once existed on Mars before a climate evolution and development that became too inhospitable, or could these discoveries stem from the other environmental explanations? Perhaps we are not as alone in our solar system as we may have once thought. The modern advancement of space exploration is unending and exciting, giving us information we never knew we were missing and providing insights and theories we never thought possible. The mysterious Rongo writing of Easter Island. Easter Island has long been a source of mystery, with the origins of its giant head statues an enigma to so many for such a long time. But this wasn't to be the only enigma found on this small remote island 1,000 miles west of South America. The ancient indigenous civilization underwent a perplexing societal collapse that today is still not fully understood. However, the key might be found in a series of undecipherable texts from the island discovered in the 19th century. In 1864, a Catholic missionary that had landed on Easter Island came across a series of ancient artifacts hundreds of years old, all with unexplainable symbols etched upon them. These symbols came to be known as the Rongo, and on further inspection seemed to be a kind of writing system, similar to the hieroglyphic nature of the Egyptians. Whilst similar, it was very much distinctive and unique to this Polynesian island. The images ranged from geometric shapes to local plant life and animals, as well as humans. The idea that this might be a series of glyphs as opposed to mere drawings is based on the uniformity of the symbols drawn. Each symbol is precisely 1 centimeter high, and when it came to the glyph of a human head, every symbol is oriented with the head facing up, facing forward, or looking to the right. There was also an orientation to the writing known as reverse boustrophodon, that went from left to right, bottom to top. The glyphs were found on numerous objects, such as a chieftain's staff, a statue of a birdman, and 2 cultural ornaments, but the longest continuous text of glyphs were found on 26 irregular-shaped wooden tablets. They were intricately inscribed, with the images neatly lined up. The lines ran across some of the tablets, with the inscriptions written in between, and other tablets had grooves with the glyphs etched into those channels. The etchings carved into the wood seemed to be made by a set of specific writing tools, perhaps small shark teeth or obsidian flakes. The Rapa Nui, Easter Island's indigenous people, are still in existence today, however. So how would this language of theirs be seemingly lost in time? There are several things that make translating the etchings so difficult. The 17th century collapse of the island's ancient civilization created a disconnect between generations, and indeed the cause of such a societal collapse is still a puzzle with no clear answer. A further drawback is the limited number of texts and other contexts with which to understand them. Unlike the Rosetta Stone, which allowed a contextual and comparable understanding of Egyptian hieroglyphs with ancient Greek, there is no such artifact available to this ancient Rapa Nui language. Some researchers say that the Rongo was not a fully developed writing system, but one might call proto-writing, a set of symbols conveying information without containing any truly linguistic content, or rather a series of symbols communicating limited information. It is thought that deciphering the messages might give clues as to what was behind the island civilization's sudden collapse, with the stories a warning and a lesson to future generations. What is clear is that the Rongo was a means of communication that speaks to its tribal past. However, as one of only 3 wholly independent writing systems in human history, it looks like the message of these writings will remain a mysterious symbol of the past to the people of the future for many years to come. A massive lake in Antarctica has vanished from satellite pictures. Overnight, an enormous lake in Antarctica has mysteriously vanished from all satellite images. A massive lake in the Amaury ice shelf in East Antarctica seemed to drain overnight, and researchers are left scrambling for answers. The lake was covered by ice for the majority of its existence until mid-2019, when the majority of the ice melted. During this time, the lake held somewhere between 600 and 750 million cubic meters of water. This lake held more water than the Sydney Harbour in Australia. To the shock and amazement of researchers and scientists around the globe, the 600 to 750 million cubic meters of water simply vanished. When the discovery was made, researchers began scouring through historical satellite images to find the exact date the water had vanished. Images provided by NASA were the main source of information used during this inquiry. While no one knows for certain how this amazing mystery came to fruition, the leading theory is that the water somehow returned to the ocean. The prominent hypothesis for how this occurred can be explained by the existence of ice shelves. The theory follows that at the bottom of the lake was a shelf of ice which served as a sort of plug drain for the lake. The ice shelf cracked under the mounting pressure of the water within the lake, and when the shelf cracked, the water was released through the gap which flowed back into the ocean. Through extensive research, it was found that the lake went from being filled to entirely drained within 3 days. Roland Warner, who served as a leading researcher on the phenomenon, claimed, "We believe the weight of water accumulated in this deep lake opened a fissure in the ice shelf beneath the lake, a process known as hydrofracture, causing the water to drain away to the ocean below." Members of the research team collectively agree that global warming may cause more ice shelves to break shortly. An excerpt found in the published study regarding the drained lake stated Antarctic surface melting has been projected to double by 2050, raising concerns about the stability of other ice shelves. Since this astonishing discovery, the lake appears to be slowly filling back up with water. It has been theorized that the ice shelf froze back over, which has allowed water to be retained in the once drained lake. James Tedford disappearance. In the winter of 1949, 56-year-old James Tedford went missing and was never to be found again. The military veteran, living in the sleepy town of Fletchertown in Vermont, had a normal, quiet life living with his 28-year-old wife, Pearl. This normalcy changed when the 1940s conflict arrived, and Tedford went off on his next tour of duties. By all accounts, he and Pearl had been happy, with no known problems, especially problems that would lead either of them to purposefully run from their lives. Pearl was the first of the two to vanish. One night, when James was back home from duty, he returned to the house to a half-prepared meal. Initially, James believed she had simply stepped out of the house for a moment and would soon return. However, when the late evening arrived, he grew worried and began asking neighbors if they knew about Pearl's whereabouts. Apparently, she had been in high spirits that day at the Emoko store in town and did not look to be distressed. Her disappearance was a shock, as it could not be determined why this seemingly happy woman would vanish. Pearl's disappearance was a shocking blow to James. He allegedly became depressed and grew increasingly reclusive, staying alone at home all day long. He later moved into the soldiers' retirement home in Bennington, Vermont, about an 8-hour bus ride to the only relatives James had left in St. Albans, Vermont. One day, when he was making the bus trip to St. Albans, he disappeared. Even more strange, he seemed to disappear from a moving bus, as it had not taken any stops along the way. According to witnesses, he was last seen sleeping in his seat, and then by the time the bus had reached its destination, he was no longer there. James and Pearl's disappearances seemed to defy logic. This seemingly normal, happy couple vanished within a few years of each other without any clues as to where they may be. Even more mysterious is the location of James's disappearance. In the years following James's disappearance, more shocking missing persons cases began to creep up in the Bennington region of Vermont. The area has even been named the Bennington's Triangle because of these mysterious disappearances. These include a missing hiker, an 8-year-old boy who vanished from his mother's truck, and a 53-year-old who disappeared while walking back to her campsite. Barbara Newhall Follett disappearance. There are few missing persons cases more shocking than that of Barbara Newhall Follett. Follett was a famous child prodigy who had already published 2 books and written numerous poems by age 16. Her debut novel, The House Without Windows, had received acclaim from the New York Times after it was released in 1927 when she was only 12 years old. Many thought she had the ability to become one of the next great American writers. Then, in 1939, she vanished. Famous geniuses do not often disappear into thin air. However, it seems Barbara's life story was not as glamorous as was thought in the past. Weekend Edition's Paul Collins had been looking into the Follett mystery for some time and found some intriguing aspects of her life. As it turns out, after she published her first book, her life took a turn when her father announced that he was leaving her and her mother for his mistress, leaving them without the family's source of income. This turn of events occurred just as the Great Depression had started. So this New York Times reviewed author was then left to desperately look for work in Manhattan as a typist. Barbara struggled to get her subsequent manuscripts published, and she wondered if her success could continue without the help of her editor father. During this period of professional unhappiness, she turned to personal pursuits, and in 1931 she fell for an outdoorsman, Nickerson Rogers. After a few years, she began to suspect that he was cheating on her, and she became depressed, antisocial, and even stopped writing. Then, in December of 1939, after a fight with Nickerson, she walked out of their apartment and disappeared without a trace. To this day, no one knows what really happened to Barbara. Perhaps she had grown disappointed with betrayals by the men she loved and vanished on purpose, or perhaps someone took her. We may never know. Her story had not even been covered by the press until more than 20 years after her disappearance because her husband had listed her unrecognizable married name in a missing person bulletin. Despite the unknowns, this story is an American tragedy, and Barbara's disappearance prevented the rest of the world from witnessing how far her talent may have taken her. The Ghost of Mount Everest. For centuries, explorers of Mount Everest have reported strange and mysterious sightings they can only attribute to ghostly and supernatural beings. While many of these tales have been dismissed as hoaxes or the results of hallucinations caused by exhaustion and altitude changes, some ghostly elements have come up time and time again from different explorers, so are harder to dismiss. There is no doubt that Mount Everest is the perfect setting for all sorts of horror stories. The mountain is littered with the corpses of people who came from all over the world to attempt to climb the Himalayan mountain. These people fell victim to the avalanches, slippery slopes, and inhospitable temperatures. Some of these bodies have even become landmarks for other climbers. For example, the corpse of Sewang Paljor, easily recognizable for his green boots, has become a landmark on the main northeast ridge route of the mountain to guide explorers. However, others claim the dead bodies have led to numerous ghosts that roam the mountain. Many climbers have reported seeing ghosts while climbing Mount Everest. For example, in 2004, Pemba Dorje described how he was pestered by the ghosts of dead climbers who looked like black shadows and approached him and begged him for food. His tale was supported by the Nepal Mountaineering Association's president, Ang Seering, who attributed the ghosts to climbers who had not been properly buried. Another example of ghostly sightings occurred in 1975, when Dougal Haston and Doug Scott claimed to sense a third climber helping them on a particularly brutal night while climbing Mount Everest. The ghost shared the men's snow hole and encouraged them during the final hours of their climb. Haston and Scott claim that the ghost was pioneer Andrew Sandy Irvine, who perished while attempting to climb the mountain in 1924. On a similar vein, in 1933, as Frank Smythe was descending down a particularly dangerous area of Mount Everest, he came across the ghost of a man. Smythe reports that he soon realized the ghost had surrounded him with two objects: squat, undeveloped wings, and a beak-like protuberance like the spout of a tea kettle. He argues these objects helped him in his descent down the mountain. Some of the ghosts have been reported as appearing in the surrounding area of Mount Everest. For example, a local villager in Bemni named Mohan Singh described how a strange man appeared outside his home and reached for Singh's shirt, but his fingers went straight through Singh's body as a ghost's fingers would. Singh described how during the encounter the man's body continuously changed sizes, growing up to 9 feet tall, then suddenly shrinking to the height of a chicken. Another example is the ghost of Indian soldier Baba Harbajang Singh, who is said to appear on horseback and still protects India's border against any impending attacks. Jacobo Grinberg. The last case we'll be talking about is that of Jacobo Grinberg, a Mexican neurophysiologist and psychologist who went missing in December 1994. Dr. Jacobo Grinberg was an academic interested in shamanism, meditation, astrology, and telepathy, among other subjects. He wrote over 50 books on various topics. He was most interested in the relationship between what appeared to be spirituality and science, researching about how the scientific method could be used for telepathy. This work was often rejected by his colleagues, as it edged too close to magic to have anything to do with science. He was a spiritual man who was determined to connect these beliefs with science, studying brain waves and experimenting with connections between mysticism and neurophysiology. On December 8, 1994, Dr. Grinberg went missing. He had a birthday party planned for the 12th that he did not show up to. But this was not odd to his family because he had a habit of disappearing without contact for days at a time. Many theories and conspiracies have circulated about where he went and why he left, and indeed, how he disappeared. There was only one that was debunked without a doubt. His family did not believe it was possible for him to have voluntarily abandoned both his work and his daughter. The strangest theory that remains surrounding this case is that of Jacobo's wife, Ter. The day after he disappeared, she cashed a check for $1,000 at a bank and dismissed the watchman at their country house. She told his stepmother that he had left for Campeche and that they would be leaving to Nepal when he returned. Making arrangements, Ter left too, but disappearing completely and having little contact with her family outside of a few calls and that year to her mother. When her family was contacted about the missing case, they claimed to have not even known that she had been married at all. This all led to Grinberg's family believing that she must have attacked him and left, perhaps not alone, but with help. However, there was never any proof of this because evidence was never found. Investigators and officers did not find blood, trails, or a body to give them any idea of what might have happened. Although the world can seem like a dangerous place, one can take comfort in the thought that cases such as these stand out because they are unusual and not common. But what do you make of these mysteries and disappearances? Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comment section below and help us by growing this community while working to solve these unexplained mysteries. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.